Have you ever stepped into someone's life with one small act, only to accidentally unlock a secret that had been buried for decades? That's exactly what happened to 10-year-old Nia Bennett, a bright black girl living with her grandmother in the quiet southern town of Ashford, Georgia. On her usual walk home from school, she spotted a sleek black Mustang Shelby stalled on the side of the road and a sharply dressed man pacing in frustration. He clearly didn't belong around here. Nia, curious and kind-hearted, offered to help. What seemed like a simple gesture quickly spiraled into something much bigger when the man's eyes landed on the silver ring on Nia's finger. A ring that didn't just sparkle in the sunlight, but shimmered with a past neither of them could have imagined. That tiny detail would lead them down a path tangled with the unsolved disappearance of a child, a supposedly shut-down charity with dark secrets, and a broken family whose truth was waiting to be found. 10-year-old Nia Bennett wasn't like most kids in her neighborhood. While others played video games or scrolled through their phones, Nia spent her afternoons in the garage with her grandfather, a retired mechanic who believed girls should know just as much about engines as boys, maybe more. With a head full of curls usually tied back in a ponytail and hands that weren't afraid to get dirty, Nia had a gift. She could hear an engine cough once and almost always know what was wrong. That afternoon in Ashford, Georgia, with the sun baking the pavement and school just letting out, Nia was walking home when she spotted a man in a crisp navy suit standing beside a broken-down black Mustang Shelby. He looked completely out of place, the kind of man who'd be more comfortable at a Manhattan boardroom table than sweating beside a smoking engine on a dusty southern road. That man was Dominic Hayes, 38, a tech millionaire from New York City who had flown into Georgia to scout land for a proposed smart farm innovation hub. His car had died unexpectedly, and his phone had no signal, making him increasingly irritated and stranded in the middle of nowhere. When Nia approached and asked if he needed help, Dominic raised an eyebrow but humored her with a polite smile. "You know cars?" he asked, trying not to sound dismissive. "Some," she said, placing her fraying backpack on the ground. "My grandpa says you can't fix what you're scared to touch." Intrigued, Dominic stepped aside as Nia knelt by the hood, surveyed the steaming engine, and pointed out a cracked coolant hose. Then, from her bag, she pulled out a tiny roll of duct tape, a small packet of stop-leak sealer, and a towel wrapped around a rusty multi-tool. With calm precision, she applied a makeshift patch, explaining each step like she'd done it a dozen times before. Dominic was stunned, not just by her knowledge, but by her quiet confidence, her no-nonsense tone, and the way she seemed utterly unbothered by the oil on her hands or the weight of the situation. As she wiped her fingers clean and stepped back, something else caught his eye, something that made the world seem to tilt for just a moment. On Nia's finger was a silver ring with a small green emerald, the stone dulled by age but unmistakable in its design. Dominic stared. He hadn't seen that ring in 20 years, not since he gave it to his younger half-sister, Talia, before she disappeared from the children's shelter their father had secretly funded in upstate New York. The ring had belonged to their mother, and it was the only piece of her Dominic had to share. That moment, long buried under the weight of corporate life and painful memories, came crashing back. "That ring," he said, barely above a whisper. Nia looked down. "It was my mum's," she said. "She told me it was a promise from someone who never came back." Dominic's heart clenched. Talia had vanished when she was just a teenager, and all inquiries into her whereabouts had ended in silence and red tape. Could this child, standing in front of him with grease on her hands and his sister's ring on her finger, be the key to everything he thought he'd lost? His instincts told him yes, but the truth would take more than just a memory to uncover. Later that evening, Dominic invited Nia and her grandmother, Miss Evelyn, to a quiet diner in downtown Ashford to thank them for their help. He insisted on covering dinner, ordering extra pie just in case Nia had as much of a sweet tooth as she had engine knowledge. Over cornbread and iced tea, the conversation drifted from school to cars to family. It was during this casual exchange that a single name stopped Dominic in his tracks: Lena Carter. Nia had mentioned her mother in passing, saying she'd passed away when Nia was just a toddler, and that she used to work in a medical center before things got complicated. The name Lena Carter sparked something deep in Dominic's memory. Back in New York, 2 decades earlier, there had been a nurse by that exact name. Quiet, compassionate, and fiercely protective of the kids at Wellspring Community Center, a facility funded through the Hayes Foundation that was supposedly a safe haven for vulnerable children. But Dominic had always harbored doubts about Wellspring, especially after the sudden disappearance of his younger half-sister, Talia. She had vanished from the center under mysterious circumstances, and every attempt to investigate had been stonewalled, redirected, or buried under bureaucratic jargon. As Dominic pieced the fragments together, a chilling possibility began to emerge. What if Lena Carter, the same nurse he remembered from the reports, had fled the center to protect a child? And what if that child, now sitting across from him, sipping soda through a striped straw, wasn't just anyone, but Talia's daughter? The emerald ring, Lena's name, the way Nia resembled old photos of his sister, it all began to make too much sense. Driven by growing suspicion, Dominic returned to his hotel that night and accessed restricted archives from the Hayes Foundation's internal records. His stomach twisted as he uncovered confidential memos referencing Wellspring's sudden closure and staff exit arrangements. Even worse were emails exchanged between his own father, Leonard Hayes, and a group of private contractors. Documents laced with vague language about asset relocation, juvenile data protection, and minimal exposure protocols. What had once seemed like a philanthropic endeavor now reeked of exploitation. It became devastatingly clear that Wellspring had been a front, a polished facade covering something far darker, a covert child trafficking network operated under the guise of charity, funded by corporate money and shielded by power. The realization hit Dominic like a punch to the gut. His own father had been complicit, if not the mastermind. Leonard Hayes, celebrated in Forbes and praised by politicians, had used his wealth to build a fortress of lies. Dominic sat back in the dim glow of his laptop screen, shaking. The girl who had patched his radiator with duct tape earlier that day might very well be the only living proof of what really happened inside Wellspring's walls. And if that was true, it also meant she was in danger. The people who once tried to silence his sister might still be out there, watching, waiting, and ready to protect their secrets at any cost. Dominic knew then that what started as a broken car and a curious little girl had quickly turned into something much bigger. He had to protect Nia, and more importantly, he had to uncover the full truth, no matter where it led or who it destroyed. Back in New York, Dominic made the decision to confront the past head-on. Under the pretense of organizing some estate documents, he accessed his father's private office while Leonard Hayes was out of the country attending a business summit. Hidden behind a panel in the study was a steel safe Dominic had only seen once as a teenager. After correctly guessing the combination, Leonard's mother's birthday, a woman he idolized, Dominic opened it and began sifting through the neatly stacked folders inside. What he found turned his blood cold. Forged birth certificates, doctored adoption records, and a spreadsheet listing children who had been renamed and reassigned across the country. Among them, one name stood out, Nia Carter, formerly registered under Lena's Ward No. 7, marked with a red asterisk and a note, "Removed from program, potential liability." It was clear now, Lena hadn't just run with Nia to escape a broken system. She had taken on the role of a whistleblower, protecting the child from something far more sinister. As Dominic flipped through more papers, he discovered a handwritten letter from Lena addressed to Talia, his sister. The letter had never been sent, and it explained everything. Lena and Talia had formed a bond at the Wellspring Center, and when Talia discovered disturbing truths about how children were being relocated, she entrusted Lena with her daughter and disappeared, likely to protect them both. But there was more. Inside a sealed manila envelope was a trust document from a small legal firm in Atlanta, dated shortly after Nia's birth. Talia had placed a modest inheritance, money from a wrongful death settlement related to their mother, into a custodial trust under her daughter's name. But the trust had never been claimed. Instead, it had been quietly absorbed into a larger foundation account, controlled, of course, by Leonard Hayes. That discovery led to a stunning realization. Nia wasn't just Dominic's niece. She was, by every legal and ethical measure, the sole rightful heir to funds her mother had intended for her future. funds that had been diverted and hidden for years. Shaken, Dominic returned to Ashford and met secretly with Miss Evelyn and a former nurse from the Wellspring Centre named Helen Morris, now retired and living quietly in Savannah. The meeting was tense, emotional and revelatory. Miss Helen, visibly aged and racked with guilt, confirmed the worst of Dominic's fears. She remembered Lena well, a kind but fierce young nurse who had grown suspicious of the facility's increasingly shadowy practices. Helen admitted that she helped Lena fake Nia's records and smuggled them out the back door the night a transfer team was scheduled to take the child. She said she couldn't let another one disappear, Helen whispered, her hands trembling. She also revealed that Lena had tried to go public but was threatened into silence, ultimately retreating to Ashford to raise Nia in peace. Dominic listened, stunned by the gravity of what had been done and what had been stolen. He looked at Nia differently now, not as a precocious girl who fixed his car, but as the living legacy of a sister he thought he'd lost forever. A legacy worth protecting. But the truth, Dominic now realized, wouldn't be enough on its own. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became, and if Leonard Hayes had once gone to such lengths to bury these secrets, there was no telling what he'd do now to keep them from being exposed. Once the full truth came to light, Dominic knew silence was no longer an option. With the help of a civil rights attorney and a whistleblower protection team, he filed a formal lawsuit against both the Hayes Foundation and his own father, Leonard Hayes, accusing them of child endangerment, fraudulent concealment of adoption records, and financial embezzlement tied to Wellspring Community Center. The legal strategy was meticulous, built around documents Dominic had retrieved from the safe, supported by testimony from Helen Morris and a handful of former employees who, now retired or disillusioned, were finally ready to speak. But Dominic didn't stop there. Understanding the importance of public pressure, he scheduled a press conference in the heart of Georgia, just outside the old shuttered Wellspring property. Dozens of reporters gathered under a rented white tent, their cameras trained on the stage as Dominic stepped up to the microphone in a simple blue blazer, his voice steady despite the storm brewing behind the scenes. He didn't open with accusations or outrage. Instead, he told a story, the story of a little girl who stopped to help him fix a broken car on a hot southern afternoon. The crowd listened intently as he recounted how that moment of kindness revealed a buried truth that spanned 2 generations. Then, with precision and quiet fury, he presented the evidence: forged custody transfers, internal emails referencing youth asset relocation, financial records linking millions in charitable funds to offshore accounts, and, most damning of all, the original trust document naming Nia Carter as the legal heir to her mother's estate. Dominic didn't spare himself from criticism, admitting that for years he had ignored the whispers and red flags surrounding the foundation, choosing comfort over curiosity. "But I met someone," he said, gesturing to Nia, who sat in the front row beside her grandmother. "And she reminded me that silence doesn't protect the innocent, it protects the powerful." That day, the world finally saw Nia for who she was, not just a bright girl with a head for engines, but the living symbol of resilience and truth. DNA testing confirmed her connection to Talia Hayes, and official state documents were corrected to reflect her identity. News stations across the country carried the story. Tech mogul's niece found living in rural Georgia exposes decades-long charity fraud. But the most powerful moment came after the conference, when Dominic introduced the launch of the Nia Hope Foundation, a new non-profit dedicated to supporting foster youth with talents in mechanics, coding, robotics, and trades. Standing at a refurbished workbench salvaged from the old Wellspring garage, Nia gave her own speech, short, unscripted, and unforgettable. "My mum believed in helping kids fix what's broken," she said, her voice strong. "Not just engines, but systems. I think we can do that. One toolbox at a time." Donations poured in within hours. Community colleges partnered to offer training, and sponsors from across the tech and auto industries signed on. And while legal battles still loomed, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Leonard Hayes' empire, once a shining symbol of tech philanthropy, began to crumble under the weight of its exposed secrets. His board ousted him within a week, pending investigation. Meanwhile, Dominic relinquished his seat on the board and redirected his shares to fund the foundation's expansion. "We're not erasing what happened," he told the press. "We're building something better from its ruins." In that moment, justice wasn't just about courtroom victories. It was about rewriting the future for every child like Nia who had been left behind. The girl who once carried wrenches in a worn backpack now carried the hopes of hundreds. And this time, the world was watching. 6 months later, the once-abandoned Wellspring Community Center had been completely transformed. Where broken windows and rusted fences once stood, now rose the modern, vibrant campus of the Nia Bennett Institute for Technical Empowerment. With funding redirected from the dissolved Hayes Foundation and donations from communities around the country, the facility now offered hands-on training in mechanics, computer coding, robotics, and digital fabrication to young people who had aged out of foster care or come from underserved neighborhoods. The workshops buzzed with activity, the classrooms were filled with students eager to learn, and the garden that Nia and her grandmother Evelyn planted together now bloomed in full color near the entrance. On the outer brick wall above the main gate, bold lettering spelled out the motto that had come to define everything they'd built. "Family isn't made by blood, but by choice, courage, and the will to protect one another." That phrase had been Nia's idea, inspired by something her mother, Lena, once wrote in her journal. During the opening ceremony, reporters gathered once again. This time not to chase a scandal, but to celebrate a story of redemption and resilience. One journalist leaned forward and asked Nia, who stood beside Dominic in a navy blue work jacket embroidered with her name, "Do you ever feel angry at the people who tried to hurt you? At those who lied and stole from your family?" Nia paused for a long moment, then offered a quiet, thoughtful smile. "No, sir," she said. "I don't feel angry. I just feel sorry for them, because they had the chance to be good people and they threw it away. That's not something I hate them for. That's something I feel sad about. But I know who I am now, and I know what I'm here to do." The crowd fell silent, struck by the maturity and strength in her words. Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. He knew that in some ways, this little girl had taught him far more than he could ever teach her. What this story reminds us is that justice isn't always about punishment. It's about restoration. It's about facing what's broken and choosing to build something better in its place. Nia's journey began with a broken-down car, but it led to something far more powerful. A broken system exposed, a hidden truth reclaimed, and a legacy rewritten. She could have grown up bitter, angry, or mistrustful, but instead she chose curiosity over fear, kindness over revenge, and healing over hate. Her story teaches us that resilience isn't just surviving what hurts, it's transforming that pain into purpose. For Dominic, the journey wasn't just about uncovering his family's darkest secrets. It was about learning that privilege means nothing without accountability, and that silence in the face of wrongdoing is complicity. And for those watching from the outside, reporters, former donors, community leaders, it became impossible to look away. They saw a girl who had every reason to be broken, but instead chose to build. They saw a man who confronted the sins of his father, not with denial, but with truth and change. The Nia Bennett Institute stands as a living reminder that out of the worst parts of our history, we can grow something beautiful, if we have the courage to plant the seeds. Because real legacy isn't built on power or prestige. It's built on integrity, compassion, and the people we choose to stand beside when things fall apart. And sometimes, the smallest act, a child offering to fix your car, can become the spark that changes everything. And there you have it, the incredible story of how a simple act of kindness by a little girl uncovered a web of secrets, redefined the meaning of family, and sparked a movement that's changing lives across the country. From a dusty roadside in Georgia to a national reckoning with justice, legacy, and truth, Nia's journey proves that courage doesn't come from age or status. It comes from the heart. Her story reminds us that even the most broken systems can be rebuilt, and even the most unlikely heroes can rise when we least expect it. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or simply reminded you of the power of doing the right thing, don't forget to support us by subscribing to X Daily Stories channel. We bring you real, powerful, and emotional narratives that not only entertain, but also inspire and challenge the way you see the world. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who believes in second chances and standing up for what's right. Because at X Daily Stories channel, we don't just tell stories, we uncover truths worth remembering. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.